Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is a look at the design way. And what we're going to do is that this is the Thursday session where everybody gets to talk about how they are approaching the book. What are they learning about design? That's what we're going to be talking about. So what we're going to do is that this is a very flexible format. So you get to talk about your experience with the book, your experience with design. So if you'd like to talk about it, go ahead and type exclamation mark. We'd go person by person. This is a way of catching up and kind of stepping back and looking at what we are learning. So that's what we're going to do. And more importantly, I just want to talk about how we are doing with the book. Let's first just everybody talk about how we are doing with the book. What your current impressions are, if there are any difficulties you're facing, anything that you're particularly liking. Just give an overview first. Let's get everybody's overview, and then we can start talking about further things. So Jeff followed by Joe. Jeff, what do you think about the book? How is it going?
Shrikant, the thing that I had not realized about it until we got into it was something that you have mentioned, that I mentioned before, which was really the focus on service. That it's not just, say, a process that could be used to make the most reasonable, or sort of full-bodied, and well situated in whatever context you find yourself, decision, but it really has a purpose there, and to me that makes it come alive in a way that it would not be if it was simply a process. And it's related to what I was going to share about how I've used it really in designing the meeting that we all just came from.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
On the
future
so
of leadership.
we'll go into that shortly. So I want to have everybody's take on how they are doing with the book, because what I'm trying to do is I want to design these meetups well. It's the most ambitious book we have tried to cover, and we are covering it in a very odd way, very different way than how people mostly cover books. So I want to get everybody's feedback on that. So I invite everybody to talk about what's there, how are they engaging with the book. So it's going to be Joe next. Joe.
I'm kind of hopping around the book itself. And I'm looking at some of the diagrams. And one of the other things that I've done is actually watch some of the videos of the authors themselves. And I guess one of my big challenges is kind of reconciling some of the language that they use with how I define certain things and how they define certain things. And at what particular, no pun intended, at what, stage in the process that they're calling something a schema, and something at what stage in the process what I would call in the development of the ultimate particular what I would call a schema. That's something I had a little bit of different perspective on, and so that was something that was a challenge. The thing that I really am seeing with this that I very much appreciate is that it is giving me a higher level perspective. I know it's very philosophically based, and that has been beneficial because I've also been looking at things that are very analytical in nature and models that are actually very analytical and very regimented in certain cases. So I've been able to see the value, and I'll give a specific example of what I'm talking about. I think this upcoming chapter of Desiderata, the idea of having our desires, basically articulating what our desires are and what outcomes are the ideal versus, say, something that is needs-based. And that's a very important distinction to make, And that's something that I found to be really insightful, because I feel like many times that people, when they're solving problems, they are putting out fires. What really drives change more times than not is something that is a triggering event that is then it limits your perspective automatically on what you can actually do, because you're just trying to put the fire out. And seeing it from that perspective, you really start to see the importance of imagination and seeing how not only to look at a problem, but to imagine things differently. And that's what Desiderata kind of is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just one other aspect of that. And I thought of a very interesting quote from Steve Jobs. When he was at Apple, he never used focus groups. And he said the reason he never used focus groups was primarily because that individuals didn't know what they wanted until they saw it, so that they couldn't tell you what they wanted. And if you take a needs-based approach, then people are telling you and limiting your perspective. And so that this idea of imagination and how that fits into this, and how this actually relates to looking at things in an innovative fashion versus a survival fashion. So there's that distinction. So that's another area that I've gotten out of the book. Starting to really see just how needs-based we react to our problems in a needs-based fashion versus a desirable fashion, and coming up with the ideal. Yeah.
Thank you. So folks, the question that is on the table is, what is your experience so far reading the book? What are you liking? What are you having difficulties with? At a very high level, what is your interaction with the book? Next up is going to be Shane Murray.
I apologize if this is a duplication of what Joe said, but I very much felt the same, in that we tend to focus on eliminating what's undesirable as opposed to intentionally designing the life that we desire. And so it makes me wonder how, while we have the undesirables in play, how do we shift focus and stay focused on what's intentional and desirable? Do we have to address both simultaneously? Do we ignore the one and just pursue what's desirable? So that really became a strong question for me, is are we navigating both at the same time, or do we exclude what's undesirable and just focus on what's intentional? That was the question that came to me as I read this. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shane Murray. David or Becky, would you like to talk about how you're engaging with the book? What are you getting? What are the difficulties you're facing? Anything?
Sure. So I'm really enjoying this book because this is my first, I guess, proper way of thinking about design. I haven't thought of it before, but I do see that the challenge here is that the precision of the language is not always there. And initially I thought, okay, well, maybe it needs to be loose in order to accommodate for all the different types of design that's applying to. However, it's not so much of that now that I've been reading more of it. It's that specific, it's almost hard to distinguish between the iterations versus like the process, and then when you're doing a comparison of the change of the process, which is like the evolution, and then all that, because we're using the words over and over, like the same words, but then in context they mean something else. So when you don't realize that there was a shift in the context, you can easily get confused with what is actually being said. However, it almost requires me to take a step back and intuitively understand, how am I designing things? Like, let me just step away from what I read. And then I come back to it, and then I see it as an, okay, this is actually what's being conveyed, except it's not as precise as I would prefer. But overall, I am enjoying it very much, because I'm going through the discovery process of that, like that confirmation of, oh, this is what I think. Oh, this is something new that I didn't realize was happening, and it is enabling me to make these these distinctions, so that when I interact with the process in real life, I can pinpoint it down and then remember to tie everything back up once I split it. So I find it very useful, and I'm enjoying it.
Wonderful. David, what about you? What's been your interaction with the book so far?
So I'm finding the book is giving me actually a very interesting framework and context for describing the process and describing the elements and the relationships. And what I keep getting is I guess these flashbacks as I read the book, and pieces of it resonate with me. For example, this morning, I don't know why, but I was looking at where the figure number 1.5. And I think Shrikant, you kind of took this and kind of did your own little graphic where it shows the true, the real, and the ideal coming together and then going into the design. And I don't know why, but this morning I just reflected back on something that occurred, in my career, I guess, 10 years ago. And how small elements within the team always need to be respected, because they may be a minor participant or contributor, but their participation in the team may actually have a significant effect on the outcome of the design. And I'll just give you the example that kind of at a very high level. I was involved in a project where we were brought in to bring in an energy storage, a battery. It was a very high voltage, very high power into this project where there was a generator and power converters and things like that. And we were integrating our battery technology into the system, into this test stand. And as we tried to connect it in, we kept getting a ground fault. And it was a safety aspect of our technology, because we were bringing something that was essentially intended to work on a surface ship, and we were bringing it into a test stand for something that they wanted to put into an aircraft. And we struggled. We just kept getting ground faults, and we could not connect. Our system just would not connect into the test stand electrically, because it was faulting. It was detecting a fault in what it was trying to connect to. Eventually, we developed a workaround, and we basically, if you will, bypassed the ground fault detection in the battery. About 3 months later, they had a major failure in the power converter. And when they did the post-mortem analysis and everything like that, the ideal was this very novel concept for a high density, high power converter. What they didn't take into consideration was the reality that electricity and water don't always mix well. So they liked the aspect of the water for cooling. So they were using, and they were focused on the heat transfer capability. but they were kind of overlooking the fact that the water is also a very good conductor of electricity. And when they started to run the system long enough and went through enough thermal cycling with it, some of the barriers that they were using for electrical isolation and the thermal isolation broke down. But what occurred to me this morning was our participation in the early stages in that team. We sensed it, we detected it. We actually had an early indication that there was a problem within the design because of the ground fault that we were detecting at an early stage, because we had a very high impedance circuitry in there that sensed it, but they were overlooking it. And that gave me, you know, when I looked at that figure, it said those elements, the true, the real, and the ideal, they all need to work synergistically together if the design is going to succeed. And if you overlook or discount one of those elements, you are putting the design, the success of the design, at risk. So I'm finding this book, the structure of this book, to be very, very profound, if you will. It gives a very good grasp of how the dynamics of the design process and all these elements need to come together and need to work cooperatively, if you will, as you mature a design to get to some, you know, the ultimate solution. Now, I'm not into some of the, you know, areas that other people have expressed into the social sciences. I'm kind of reflecting more back on more traditional engineering systems. But I'm finding the book to be very insightful and a tremendous structure. It is at a very high conceptual level. So I would not, at this point, I don't think the book is an introductory book, but it is really one of those, a book that allows you to go into that at the next level, truly understanding the depth and the dynamics of a design team and the components and elements of the design process.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to follow up on one thing, and I want to welcome everybody to talk about what they're getting from the book. I mean, one thing that you said, David, that I think is a really big point is that it is there is a profound structure to the book. And I think he's coming at it from a depth of ideas, and he's presenting it in a more traditional way, but he's coming at it from a very deep base. So take, for example, this true, real, ideal, and design, right? This is basically metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics, and how all of these things have to come together. Or you can look at it. So there are many different, this actually captures like really large patterns of ideas, and the whole thing is structured based on that. So the idea that there is a profound structure underlying it, and you can see it in the parts itself, that's a very deep point. Thank you. Next up, Shane Murray, you had a comment. Go ahead.
Yes, one of the things that this, I don't know why this particular book, maybe it's just because I've been participating long enough to have this thought, but is the design itself of 52 Living Ideas, and how it is, like, what is behind this design that introduces those of us to these very ideas. I mean, these are ideas that I wouldn't have found myself. And so I'm deeply interested in how it is that you brought us to these ideas. Not only that, Shrikant, but you have a beautiful way of allowing for others to participate in trying to grasp these ideas without interjecting so much so where you're just talking. And so I'm deeply curious about the design that I'm participating in now that you've created. It's quite beautiful. So I thank you for that.
Absolutely. And I will answer that. I will also have Jeff talk about his application to the meetups that he's doing, and then I'll be happy to talk about that. But let's first get what everybody is getting from the book. Let's see, Jing, what about you? Are you there?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm actually cooking.
Okay. Do you want to talk at another time, or is this a good time to talk?
Maybe a little bit later. Yeah.
Sure. Sounds good. Whenever you're ready, go ahead and type exclamation mark.
Okay, thank you.
Ambika, what about you? What are you getting from the book?
I read for Monday. I don't have much time between Monday and Wednesday, but certainly we resonate with the ideas of design, because in many ways we are designing so many different things. So that's what I'm getting, the resonance with what we already do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Next up is Kevin or Mike. Would you like to share what you're getting?
I can go. Yes, for me, I work on the software industry, IT. So I see that between the gap is like from customer and the user to the designer architecture perspective. Earlier days, it's like, for one example, 20 years ago, I remember we developed one solution, IT called the information, like basically used to use paperwork to do their own finance and stocking. Then we try use the IT computer. They thought you know everything. You are like guru of a computer from the client side and the user. However, actually we don't know the business. We don't know the finance. Like, so that's the gap. And 1 year we ship to the customer, lots change. That's now these days use agile way. For me, and the conclusion, I would say, in the book they mention that too. Designer self need to prove, learn the requirements and scope. And always second one, design the process. And I would say also it's a change, always changing. Build adaptive solution. Then anything change, embrace it, and work close to the customer. One barrier maybe is budget, time, and quality. You're going to ask customer, they're going to ask you more. So that's okay, can you do better this? They're going to piece add up. So that that's the project management come up. Need to, I'm pause here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Brian, what about you? What are you getting from the book?
Well, as I said, I'm still I'm on about the third chapter that I'm reading so far, so I haven't formulated a great opinion of it so far.
Sure.
Before I use in any design projects, I have an understanding of where it's going, because it's in depth, and I am enjoying what I do find time to read, but I really need to read more of it and
Sure.
get through more before I use anything in a serious way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. All right. So the next question that I want to bring up is we are proceeding through this book in a very odd. Oh, Mike, I was scared to ask you what are you getting from the book, but go ahead. You can take 5 minutes.
I'm not sure I could say anything meaningful in 5 minutes. However, either that's too long or too short.
Mike, I have found that if I give you less time, you actually say a lot more. So maybe you can say it in 1 minute.
All right. Well, every book I read leads me back to Plato's Allegory of the Cave, which says what you see depends on your point of view, and further that reality is not what you think it is. And this book also went in that direction. Most of what's in this book says that the success of a project, and it is all about success of a project, depends on people, on how you structure your team. Often, and most of the time, David's concept about how his battery worked. That was a technical problem was a tall pole in the tent that needed to be solved, and you needed to do some out of box thinking and not ignore things that were in plain view. As an amateur physicist, I can say that water is a good insulator if it's clean. In fact, the dielectric constant is 80, and it's the best insulator, and that's why a whole lot of machines were water cooled.
Mike, what are you getting from the
Okay,
book?
I got that out of the book and out of our discussion. And if water doesn't work, you can really go out of the box, and liquid sodium, if your system could take the high temperatures, is a good coolant. Okay. Jeff had a team on leadership and a discussion on leadership a few hours ago. And how you organize the team, it makes a big difference toward the success of the project. And one of the things that goes behind that is how you organize the entire project, which puts together the team and allocates work and defines the objectives. And going into that, having stakeholders on the team in some capital, and the book talks about that in a lot of detail. So engineering project leadership is all about the ability to connect among the different pieces, among the different people, among the different sub teams, and putting together a weapon system or a Tesla car involves a lot of people, maybe hundreds of people, and you got to get them all pointed in the same direction without micromanaging it to take away initiative.
Thank you,
I
Mike.
got one more thing that's
Sure.
useful. One of your heroes, one of my heroes, is Kahneman.
Mhm.
Kahneman started out before he was really a psychiatrist, but as a Talmudic student. And his job everybody goes in at a young age into the Israeli military. And his job was to select leadership people and leadership traits and design these kind of teams because they realized he was pretty smart even before he got his degree. Unlike me, which it took a while before, and I still haven't got to that point. But at any rate, he was trying to come up with criteria for selecting teams, for selecting people to invest in leadership training and project management training. And it's a different project, it's a different concept now when we're trying to build teams that are co-located in different geographic areas and never see each other.
Thank you.
Compared when they all worked in one big room. Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye.
Thank you, Mike. Shane Murray was talking about the design of the meetup. You are the only person, Mike, whom on my entire design, everything works. I have never figured out how to get you to talk in a way, because the thing is that your knowledge is so deep, so broad. You're so many interesting things to say, but I have never figured out how to make sure that every minute is making my standard for the meetups here is that every 2 minutes, people should think that they are happy that they lived those 2 minutes. And I've been able to achieve that with almost actually everyone. except Mike. At the same time, his ability to deliver is so large that I don't know how to. So I have that. That's my one failure. So Shane Murray, that's like, you know, it's a design thing. If I can figure out how to make this work with Mike, I mean, it's going to go to a new level.
Oh,
Yes,
I'm
Mike.
happy to be here at the occasional jump in and talk level, even though most of the time I have nothing to say. Thank you.
No, you have amazing things to say. I know only one rule that works really well for you. The less time I give you, the more you say. That's absolutely true. So maybe that's a good starting point of trying to solve this special case. Thank you. Next up is Shane Murray.
Real quick, one thing that I just realized that was captured in this was this notion that in the design way, we are recreated in the design, so that there's something that transcends what the intention of the designer was initially, so that even though we pursue it and we apply ourselves to it, in the end, we are recreated it in some essence. And I think that's what much of us pursue when we pursue design, is to be recreated or to transcend that which we're doing. Wonderful. Excellent observation. So now the question I want to ask you is that we are proceeding through this book in a very unusual way. We are jumping around. I've arranged it through these 4 spirals where we hit one part of each of the sections. So far, to me, from everything, it seems to be working, but just your comments on that. Are you finding that easy, difficult? Do you see any advantages, disadvantages of doing that? Any feedback on that? Go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. Becky.
I'm very glad that we started with chapter 9, because it was very intuitive in understanding the whole, going down to the parts and coming back out, but then also seeing the high level diagrams of that iteration. And then so when we did talk about the ultimate particular, I already had like that big concept of what I was understanding and how that fit in with the chapter we had read the prior week. So I actually appreciated doing that one first, and then reading the one for next week. So I already jumped onto what came out of that one, which was like, oh, well, I want to read Judgment after Desiderata. So there's almost like a natural flow, which is like, I'm very glad that you're doing it from hindsight. So you're giving us the best way that you thought would make sense. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and the other thing is that you should, I mean, the author explicitly asks you to say, you know, follow your interest, follow the lines that you find useful, because it is an integrated whole. So you can go through it through multiple paths and it works when you do that. So, you know, Judgment, I'm going to do that in the next cycle for sure. So that's part of, I've put, by the way, for everybody, I've put that entire sequence of how we're going to go through in every meetup. So you can see the entire sequence, and you are welcome to read in any order. I strongly recommend reading the whole book through. I have rigged up my Kindle so that it can speak to me. So I can just listen to each chapter within like half an hour or something like that. So it's very, very quick, and I can go like twice the speed. So when I'm rereading it, re-listening to it. And what that does is that you see the pattern of what is there, and you start to, by going through it, that's how my mind works. By going through it multiple times, you get more and more value out of it. You notice things that you did not notice before. You crystallize the essences better, and I'm continuously writing and trying to capture it in my own way. So, or drawing and trying to capture it in my own way. So wonderful. Thank you, Becky. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to agree as well. I like the way it's set up and the way we're going through this. I find one of the most remarkable things about the book itself is that you can reorganize it and still get a tremendous amount out of it, or you can come away and it can be a lesson plan within itself that you can reorganize the entire book. It's pretty interesting. I too am somebody that gets a little bit more by going through it the second time as well. And I think that's I think by going through it in this fashion, you're kind of taking one concept and then you're looking at the next concept and you're able to make a connection a little bit more. You're thinking more intentionally, I'll say that. If you're reading The Ultimate Particular before you're reading Desiderata, then you're actually thinking about these two concepts and how they work with one another. And it's a little bit more, you're a little bit more focused. So because you're not reading it like a book, and there's still it's in an order that it needs to be in. So I really find that to be extremely helpful. The way you structured it. So I very much appreciate the way you structured it as well, because I think some parts will probably be more challenging than others, but when we get to the next part, it has a way of connecting. We see the connections a little bit easier. And I can speak to that for The Ultimate Particular and Desiderata, the link between those two, the ideal. Now that I know how the ideal fits in within The Ultimate Particular, thanks to Becky, that I understand where that fits in with the idea of desire and how the ideal fits in that, and even the framework that you just discussed. We'll get to questions later, and I have a question.
Yes, we'll have plenty of time for that. Next up is Robert. Robert, go ahead.
Is Harold here tonight?
No, not here tonight. You can talk behind his back now.
Yes, and I will. This is my version of the design way that I have had for several years. My dog-eared it for me. But this started in the 70s and worked its way through the years among many people, but Harold and Eric were, of course, the authors. And don't feel bad if you don't grasp what's going on after you've read it once or twice. Do what I do and keep going back, because something will happen in the design process along the way in your life, and you'll think, I think I read that in that book, and you go look at the book and it gives you a fresh perspective. But you can't memorize all the stuff that's in here, so don't even try.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much, Robert. Really appreciate that. Next up is Shane Murray.
I was just thinking, I really appreciate that we're not starting from cover to cover, or starting and ending cover to cover. It reminds me of the Choose Your Adventure books, where kind of depending upon how you would want to see the storyline go, you would go in a different direction, but it suggests design in and of itself by choosing kind of what is drawing you, what chapters are drawing you. So I appreciate that. To me, it suggests more of an involved design in your reading as you don't start from the cover and end with cover.
Wonderful. I mean, another reason I'm trying to do that, if anybody else has comment on this way in which we're going through the book, you're welcome to type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. One other thing that I found is that, these different sections speak to different kinds of minds. Like there are some minds which are very analytical and they can absorb certain things really well. That's the natural. Some people are more intuitive and they can get this kind of larger picture. There are people who are very application oriented. They get some of these things better. And like some of these sections are predominantly more of one than the other. And by keeping on switching from them, it is a very interesting way of making sure that everybody is engaged, so everybody gets kind of the starting place, like placeholders, some kind of a hold on to the book so that you can, approach it your own way. And I think the best thing here is the fact that so many of us are reading the book together and openly discussing what we are getting from the book, what we are finding difficult, because we are actually seeing these multiple perspectives on the same thing, which is making our appreciation deeper. Some other person will notice some things that you have not noticed. That happens to me all the time. So that is, I think, a fantastic way of doing that. Now, let's see. Jing, are you ready to talk? Or are you cooking or eating?
Oh, just finished cooking.
Oh, you're still cooking. Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. We'll come back to you. Whenever you're done, just go ahead and type exclamation mark. Next up is Jeff. Jeff.
So, Shrikant, I wanted to say that I'm really glad we're doing this in the order that you're putting it out there, because just by way of example, I think it was really important to see in that first thing we read that his goal was to help create a culture of design. I think that's Peter Drucker, famously said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast," and I really disagree with him about it, because I think culture eats everything for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that so the idea of design as a culture, both within oneself as well as with people co-creating, is a very important foundation for the book itself. And then to go from the purpose of that culture of design being service, but then to go into the ultimate particular, really it begs the next question, which really is why, which really it begs the desiderata question, so I'm glad we're doing it in that order. And I really do think that the next version of the book should rearrange the chapters to be in the order that you're having them, you're having us read them.
No, it's not. That's not necessary. But it's actually the format is actually very good, because what it is doing is that it has separated out the kinds of chapters. So each of the chapters are, these parts are different kinds. And some people will find it easier to go through, okay, I'm going to take all these, all the foundational concepts and deal with them all together. Some people will find, I'm going to look at all the skills, all the ways of design, of improving methods of design all together. At the same time, you put this diagram where you can do it in parallel. The only thing I would add is that I would add this spiral function of saying that you can spiral through it. These are all the things that you build. And spiral, I find to be a very uniquely human shape of way in which the human mind works, because you're kind of circling back to things. But when you circle back, you are at a higher level because you have grasped something that have become a part of you. So when you come to the same point in that circle, you are now at a higher level. And each of the concept keeps adding something on a dimension to you. And when you come back at it, you get a better perspective. So I think spiral, to me, captures it. So I would just add one more diagram on the spiral. That's all I would do. Because what it does is that it's a way of, again, the way in which he has used this, the diagrams is just fantastic. Because what it does is that the diagrams allow you a perspective on the entire material. So instead of just going through a text which is sequential, diagram allows you to almost take a schematic, like an X-ray vision of saying, okay, what is this all about? in the most simplest way. So that's what I would say. All right. So let me go ahead. So firstly, what I want to do is that I think we are off to a very good start. I wanted to do these 2 separate days on the week to make sure that everybody, we were doing everything right. And I think we are on a good path here. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to now take this session and move it into the later part of Monday. So from 11 o'clock to 11:30, we will do what we are doing now of basically doing that. So what it does is that it compresses the meetup just into Monday. So it releases Thursday to do more things on the 52 living ideas, to add more richness. I wanted to make sure that we do it in 2 parts first, to make sure that we are doing a good job on this book. I feel very confident now that we are on the right track. So we can now compress it into a single evening. What that does is that there is advantage of doing things in a single sitting, because many people will come on Mondays, more people will come on Mondays rather than both days. So it allows us to focus. We'll spend a little bit more time on Mondays. The reflection part that we will do from 11 to 11:30 will have the background of everything that we have done from 9 to 11 alive in us. So we'll be able to do that. It becomes easier for everybody to schedule. So for various reasons, I'm going to move this part into Monday. So that way, you can plan your reading cycles on once a week basis. This was just, this kind of three times was just to make sure that we were on the right track. And I feel very confident that we are on the right track with, thanks to all your feedback. So that's kind of the structural thing that we're going to do. All right. So now I want to just ask people to raise any questions that they have. So we'll take all the questions that you want to raise, and then we'll put it all together and we'll discuss them, and we'll go from there. Joe, you have questions?
I do, and actually it's just based off of what you were just saying. I know that Jang actually typed exclamation point.
Oh, she, okay.
If you want to let her speak.
Jing, two questions. One, what are you getting from the book? What is your overall view of the book? And second question, which you can answer later on, is what do you think about the way in which we're going through the book in the spiral fashion, not in the sequential fashion? Go ahead.
Yeah, so far I really enjoyed the book, but I haven't read the whole book, so I'm not sure about the sequence of it. I was like busy reading through and through PVP. So, but I think I understand reading through follow your order. It makes sense so far. So
okay,
I think it's good. Yeah, I want to actually get some feedback about this last chapter, because I was so busy. I only read on Monday, and so this ideal, the real, and the truth. I found it pretty funny with my pictures, but I'm not sure it's a proper interpretation. It's just a fun example about the truth, ideal, and the real. I wonder. I just want to get some feedback on that.
You wanted feedback on the graphics that you used?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was. I mean, the thing is that I like your slides very much. The primary value of it is that it really makes that chapter come alive in the minds of people, whether they have read it or not read it. So even for people who have not read it, it gives them a core idea of what the chapter was about. And for people who have read it, it brings to life that chapter. I think that the graphics that you use are kind of idiosyncratic and very interesting and kind of funny. And it's like, they're very dramatic. It's very imaginative way of using graphics. So it works as almost like a side-by-side communication. So you are saying a lot with graphics, and you're saying a lot with text. It's kind of like what Harold Nelson is trying to do with his diagrams, except that you're doing more with your graphics. With the PowerPoint medium, it is easier to do more, and that's what you're doing. So I think they work very well, and they provide a much more, it's not like a direct connection. See, the graphics I use in a very different way. Like I'm trying to summarize everything in this one diagram. That's how my mind works. But what you're doing is that you're actually focusing people's attention on one particular aspect that you want them to focus on. And you're using a series of diagrams to do that. You're using the people walking through these entire diagrams alongside the text in order to make the point. So I think they work very well. So that's my feedback.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I just don't want it to feel improper.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And Cheng, these people here are the most, firstly, they're very much open-minded. And what it does is that some amount of shock is not bad. It's actually quite good. Your thing about the ideal and the real, David and that one, that was very funny. And it worked very well.
Okay.
Wonderful. So now for questions, folks. Go ahead, Shane Marie, you had a question.
This is kind of unrelated, but as I approach this material, what comes to mind is it's novel in essence. And so I'm wondering if you can provide some kind of indication as we approach new material that comes to us almost like a foreign language. How is it that we come to become familiar with it sufficient enough that it no longer just sits like a foreign language indefinitely? So can you suggest how it is that as you approach information, that you navigate it so that you can start to internalize it and start to make it something that's integrated within you? If you could provide information on that, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. How do you make new material your own? Very good. Joe, I have to apologize. I forgot your question. I forgot to write it down.
Oh yeah, because I didn't get to really ask yet, so
Okay.
So you didn't forget.
Oh right. Okay. I
So-
remember asking you a question, and I looked here. I don't have anything. Go ahead.
No. So it's something you had mentioned how and this is something I've kind of gone back and forth on with in a couple different ways, but the true, the real, the ideal, and how that relates to the aesthetics, the ethics, and the reason.
Wonderful. Aesthetic. Go ahead.
Yeah, those three, how they map into one another or relate to one another.
Sure.
Because I think that will actually give me a better understanding of the ultimate particular as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Robert.
I wanted to give a hint as to how to deal with all of this new stuff. In my dog-eared book in the back, I have 3x5 cards, and I put on those cards words that Harold has thought up, like desiderata, and I write it down so I can 3 years later go back and figure out what the hell he was talking about.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Next up, let's see. Who else has questions? All right. So I want to take up the questions. Let's see. How do you make material your own? And then aesthetics. And I also want to answer Shane Marie's question about design of these meetups, because all of you are familiar with these meetups. So it would be very interesting to talk about design of this. And I do think a lot about design of this. So those are the three things on the table. Okay, so the first one is, I'm going to open this up for anybody. How do you make new material your own? Ambika, do you have a question or do you have an answer?
Oh, I wanted to add a comment about Joe's question, actually.
No. Comments will come later on.
Oh, okay.
We're taking questions one by one. And then
Okay.
everybody gets to answer that question. And then we'll go to Joe's question, and then everybody gets to answer that.
Got it.
Right. Okay. So how do you make material your own? Robert has given, his answer. How do you guys do it? Because this is not just about this book. This is about everything that you do. One part of it is that this idea of living ideas is about that, of saying that ideas by themselves are useless unless you're living them. That's what the ideas are for. And the second part of it is that they're living ideas in the sense that you take an idea and then you integrate it into your life. In the process of doing that, you transform the idea and you formulate it in your own way. So it is, the idea keeps on moving and your life keeps on moving. It's a dynamic process. So anybody who has any thoughts about this, Joe, how do you do it?
I think the most effective way, but it is a bit time consuming, is to pull apart each area that you see appropriate and kind of come up with your own diagram. Something similar to what Jang does every week. And in the sense that once you make that your own, you start to be able to actually see the parts and how they come together. Because you're actually thinking about the definitions of each part of the diagram. And, I start to see where they got to the spiral in many of their diagrams, where I wasn't necessarily thinking about that before specifically. And I know, you've shown me plenty of diagrams in the past with spiral, so that's been very helpful. I also find speaking it out with other people to be obviously one of the greatest benefits of this entire. It's the benefit of 52 living ideas, those are the two major things that I think that are really important when you're going through the book, is to really kind of pull it apart and make it your own. And then you can go back and compare and contrast later on, as Robert has already mentioned, and said, what is he really talking about there? As you apply it in your own words.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Jing, followed by Becky. Jing.
Well, I think first we have to understand, and I think this book is a little bit hard to understand, actually. It's really complicated. And then we have to put in practice. I think the theory and practice, there are always this circular process we have to go through. Like you mentioned the spiral, more like. So it takes, so what I actually learned from this very strong impression, one is about this right-left brain separation. Quite interesting, my son joined this Plato, on Monday writing class. And he said, Socrates said the logic, the most highest human intelligence. And he doesn't agree with it. I was like, oh, that's great. That's exactly what we learned. So I talked with him about what we learned, how hippies know was separated right and left brain. I said, you already get this. That's wonderful. So that's what I found, and also I talk with people when they said, we only make comments, we don't complain, in this parents group, I said, human are integration of both rational and emotional. You can't separate it. So I think that's very fundamental idea. A lot of people didn't realize it, in the daily practice. I think that's quite interesting. And so how we use this concept, we can actually interact with people and use that concept and apply it. I think that's kind of important to me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Becky.
I realize that it's often like when I'm trying to learn something, I don't automatically get it. I'll just read it and it's like, oh, I agree with this little piece. I agree with that little piece. And then it's you sit on it and then you get that aha moment. But you can bring it up, you can kind of like cajole it along if you start drawing things. And so instead of waiting for it to just happen, you start fiddling with it and start testing with other concepts with it. And it goes back to Joe's presentation with the OODA loop. And you have all your different pieces, you break it apart, you rejoin them again. And that's what I end up doing with this thing. I end up just being able to get everything because I broke it out down into pieces. It's like, okay, what's going on in this chapter? What's going on in this chapter? How can I tie them together? How can I pull them apart and put it in a different context? How do I apply Jung's cognitive functions to it? How do I put my like overlay it with the work that I'm doing it for my career, and really testing it to see if it's fitting, because if not, well, I got to update it with the new information that I'm perhaps missing, and then it really becomes my own.
Wonderful. Thank you, Becky. Next up is Joe, followed by Ambika. Joe.
Yeah, one thing also is to try and concretize it, if and bring it into the real. That's apply it to a real project. And I've tried to do that in my own way, in thinking about schemas and systems and how they could actually work together and how they become the ideal. And specifically, I was thinking about it something where a project that I was working on is, how does a schema, what would it do? How would it change the way the data was actually structured? Almost the language, how we communicate, how would that interact with the system? I consider that to be the real. But the framework for thinking about it, but also trying to make it, bring it into the real world in a real project. I find that to be the most effective way to really because then once you have that framework, you can start to apply it to a number of things, as you have in with the, whether it be a Bible series, whether it be whether it be the OODA loop or whatever it may be. How do these things connect to one another? But I think bringing it into something very specific, that's very concrete, is a good way of approaching it.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is Ambika, followed by Shane Murray. Ambika.
So the idea of how you appropriate something that is foreign to you to make it your own, a couple of things that I find helpful. I love watching movies. I used to watch a lot, and I would watch films in different languages. People's expressions, and it's just delightful, because when you make a heart connection, or when you connect intuitively, you step back without giving your own way that has to fit. And if it doesn't, then you throw it out. No, it's just what comes through as not just flow. I don't want to get into the something that you're familiar with, but to find the beauty in that which is unfamiliar, and play with it. And you may create an ideal vision in, for example, something else, but when you actually create it, it changes. And that change must be natural and must be allowed to express itself, because that which you are creating has its own voice at some stage of its creation. And so it's always this dance. And I use the metaphor or the image of braiding, which takes you into a whole different form. And if a strand of hair doesn't work here, you remove it or bring in another one, which for me ties in again with the question that Joe had raised, with the idea of aesthetics and ethics and morality of that creation. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ambika. Next up is Shane Murray, followed by Jeff. Shane Murray.
So I appreciate what everyone's saying. I had a friend who spoke Spanish. I have a little bit of Spanish background, and we went to a Luis Miguel concert, and when he was singing, I didn't understand what he was saying, but there was something emitted there that I grasped and I felt very deeply connected to. So I felt like I was hearing, even though I didn't know specifically what was being said. But there are instances in which I read, which I don't feel that I'm getting anything. And so that is really my question, is that absent, I don't even know what it is. And I read quite often, but there are instances absolutely in which I read in which I'm just not connecting. I'm not grasping. It might as well be a new language in which I'm grasping nothing. So I think of that in terms of religion. I think of that in terms of anything, like how do we familiarize ourselves with these things sufficient so that we can weigh them properly when initially it just seems totally inaccessible.
Wonderful. I'll try to address that. Let me do one thing. Let's start with Jeff, and I'll come back to this point. I also want to follow up on some points that Becky made about cognitive functions. I think those are very relevant here as well. So Jeff.
Shrikant, one of the things that we do when we design training programs came out of a suggestion from one of our participants once, which is to suggest to folks that they take the program and experience it on three levels. That one, they take notes regarding something that was said or something that it made them think, and so there's just that, sort of something they want to remember or something that it made them think. Second, they might write down something that they heard that they'd like to share with somebody else, and maybe put a dot next to that or a check mark next to that, because in forming it to share it with somebody else, you do have to kind of take it apart and then be able to explain it to someone, and that chances are you'll remember things that you actually take and share with somebody else. And then the third was when you come upon something that you'd actually like to try out using in some situation or with some person, that apply it as an experiment to see what happens, and put a different mark next to that. What you have in your notes are not only things that you heard that you wanted to remember, things that were intriguing to you, but also something you wanted to share with somebody, so you remember to do that, as well as something you wanted to try. And that became a very powerful tool for appropriating and incorporating things that you were gaining from an experience beyond just listening, and even beyond just taking notes.
Thank you, Jeff. Next up is Jeng.
Yeah, I want to say, so I think this book has so many concepts, and a lot of them actually can dive much deeper with experience. So, for example, like the truth, ideal, and the real. There's so many different things we can analyze it. What is truth? What's the real? What's ideal? In relationship, in social status, in organization. I think if in that way we can understand much. I think there are a lot of concepts like that, like the right brain, left brain, this separation. How it happened. In different things, how we can resolve it. I think there are so many things. I just found this book touch a lot of things that we can get so much in deeper with something we can associate with. Because when you just read this abstract, it makes sense. But when you actually connect to the things happen around you, then it makes much more sense. That's one thing I realized. I think that, for example, when they do, maybe we don't do it every Thursday, but if we do anything, we may set today, we discuss this with different, just like Harry Potter, you use a book or you use something, like then you use this concept. I think there's so much thing we can get into, because I think it touched so many deeper concepts we can understand more profoundly.
Thank you, Jing. So I want to say a couple of things. I like learning. Okay, so I really like learning. So I'm trying to do that all the time. And so there are a few things I've learned. One is that you have to understand yourself, and you have to understand your style of learning, what works for you, what does not work for you, what you're good at, what you're not good at. And it's important to have a decent map of that. It's very difficult to have it because you kind of take your operation as natural and you say that's just how it is, how all human beings are. And that's not true. Actually, people are very different from each other, and the combination of skills that each of us have is different. So one is that you have to understand where your strengths lie and also where your weaknesses lie. And you have to be explicit of saying, okay, I'm going to now use my strength in order to make the most of it. And sometimes you have to say, okay, this is my weakness, but I'm going to do a little bit here because, if I do a little bit work here, it is going to produce an outsized return. So firstly, to know the strengths and weaknesses. And I think this, for me, Jung's cognitive functions have been very helpful in doing that. So for example, there are people who are very analytic. They think very carefully about words that they are using, the definitions of them, and they can get a lot done with those things. Okay. Then there are people who actually like to work with their hands. The way they understand things is that actually moving, doing things, that's the only way they can really grok something. Then there are people who are intuitive in the sense that they can see patterns easily amongst a large kind of swath of things. They can just go through it and they will see a pattern in it. And then there are people who can react to things very quickly. Their reaction mechanism, emotional mechanism is very fine-tuned. And there are all these things. There is kind of trade-offs between them. People who are generally very good at thinking through things, it requires a lot of focus. So they generally are not as good as noticing their feelings. Then people who are really focusing on a concrete and trying to understand through it, generally cannot step back and look at the patterns. So there are trade-offs between some of these axes, and all of these are real. It doesn't mean that you have one or the other. You have all these capabilities, but the more you understand about what capabilities you have, also you have to realize that everybody who is producing something is also coming from a certain background. So you will find that like for example, Louis Sullivan is a very intuitive person. So I can get what he's saying like that. But for many people, it is extremely hard. They don't know what he's saying. And it's like, I look at them and I used to think, what he's saying it very plainly there. How can you not get it? And vice versa, there could be like mathematical theorems where people can just go, oh yes, of course. And then other people, they have these furrowed brows and they can't go from one step to another. So there are all these differences. So you have to know those differences. That's one part of it. Second part of it is that you have to realize that the world is very large and enormous amount of material has been produced. So you should look at things that you can actually, get into. So primary, at least 80% of the time, because there is a lot that you can take in directly and get tremendous value out of it, right? Maybe 20% of the time, you do need to allot some percentage of time to kind of say, okay, this is where I would like to grow a little bit. I'll put that additional effort. But you should not feel, I am very big fan of letting books go, of saying if something is not doing, if after you put in some amount of effort, if you're not getting something back, just drop it. Maybe you can come back to the same book another time and it will be different. Okay, but it's important to make progress each day. So, and there are choices, always choices. And this you get from the book that I really recommend for all of this is How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler. You should not read another book before reading How to Read a Book, except The Design Way, of course. Because it's very deep, because what it is saying is that there are 20 million books out there, 1 million books are being produced every year. How do you navigate this universe? That's the problem you have to solve. Not, okay, how am I going to read this particular book? So those are my comments. Next up is Joe's question. Joe, can you go ahead and restate your question?
Yes, absolutely. So how do aesthetics, ethics, and reason relate back to the ideal, the real, and the true? How are they interacting with one another?
Sure. Now, I know I'm not particularly good at this, but I'm going to go ahead and try. Okay.
Good.
And then everybody can go ahead and add. These three things, actually, these are four things. So there is true, there is real, true, ideal, and design. Okay, those are the four things.
Right.
The real is basically just what is. I mean, the way I see it at a very deep level is that it's just the world. What is given, what is. So the question here is, what is it? You know, what is what is real. Okay. The true, and so the first one, the real is the metaphysics of this is just what is. The true, and this is my understanding of it. Okay. The true is epistemology. It's basically your reason, your engaging of your reason to figure out what is true. It is achieving concepts. It is achieving principles, achieving knowledge of reality. So there is a connection between true and real. But true is about epistemology. It is about knowledge. Ideal is about ethics. It is about values and virtues. How should we do things? And what should we aim at? That's what it is about. And design, to me, is aesthetics. It is actually producing something which is concrete based on your knowledge that moves you forward towards the ideal. And it speaks to you at every level. It is physically useful to you in your life. It emotionally speaks to you. It works at an individual and social level. It is spiritually satisfying. So it's basically, it has to work across all these domains. It has to be towards the ideal. It has to be true. It has to be fully integrated. It has to, can't have contradictions with other things. And it has to be effective in interacting with reality. So you're actually transforming reality in the process. You're producing something which is real based on, because real is just given by doing the work on true, you understand the real better. By formulating your ideal, you figure out where the real needs to go. And the design process is to take all of these three things to make something real, actual concrete, which makes reality better. Joe, followed by Shane Murray. Anybody else? Just go ahead. If you would like to comment, go ahead and type a exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. Joe.
So I guess that's kind of where I'm getting a little bit hung up. And this is why I love this session, because so I understand that the aesthetics go to design and the ideal goes to, there's ethical considerations there. So where I'm getting a little bit lost is, and I'll just use a concrete example. I don't want to take too much time, but the idea of the schema is being a real, and that's
what do you mean by schema? I don't understand.
Well, that's where, so what the book calls a schema and what I'm defining as a schema is just how is a model of thinking for, like, in a schema, in the sense I'm thinking about it in terms of computers, like how you have a schema for a language for structuring data, for structuring information. And I look at that as a language as being true. And then I look as a system that it goes into as being real. So the system is real, the schema is true, and then the ideal is how that you integrate this scheme, the data, which is also, is part of the equation, into the system. And then, so people tend to think of, and I don't want to take too much time, but really quickly, where I work, people tend to think of the system just producing the data for them. They pull the data down. It's usually wrong. So they actually created a subsystem, and they have all different systems, and there's all different. So a way of structure, I said, instead of doing that, look at the point of entry, structure your data so you have it in a schema that you can pull the data from anywhere. So then you have the schema I looked at as being the true. It's almost a language onto itself, just like the word became flesh, the word. So then you have the real, which is the enterprise system that it goes into. And that's where I was kind of going into, and I was thinking through this. And then, so now that you have the data available at a point of entry, that you can pull it down from at any point, that it starts to, that's the real true. And then the ideal is that you're able to now access the information in any format using any tool that you would want. You don't have to go to the enterprise system anymore. That's the ideal particular in this instance. So that's how I meant it.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Joe. I'm not able to follow.
Okay.
It's too complicated, and it has it. I think there is a lot of kind of particular data that you have, lots of particulars that you have with reference to which you're thinking. So I'm unable to actually understand actually how all of this is coming to, and it's going to be, it's going to be difficult for people to grasp. That's my guess.
Okay.
What I would say in terms of just the schema, I mean, I look at schema as something, design schema as something very simple, like the diagrams that I have. I would call it a schema because it's a way of capturing the whole of design process in one unit, something like that. That's how I'm thinking about it. I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, but let me go with Jing. So folks, question on the table is the interaction between the real, the true, and ideal, and how is it connected to things like aesthetics, ethics, epistemology, metaphysics. So it's going to be Jing, Shane Murray, and Ambika. Jing.
Yeah, Joe, based on my limited understanding of what you described, I think the real is the data they gathered is not effective. Then the truth is there's data can be organized in different ways. An ideal is they should be organized in different categories. People can withdraw as they want. So that's my understanding of this situation.
Thank you, Jing. Next up is Shane Murray, followed by Ambika.
Okay, so bear with me. I'm trying to think through this as it comes to me, but so the design way seems to suggest an intentionality. And I would suggest that we also design unintentionally. And if we could bring that to light and recognize that even though it's unintentional, we are designing, meaning that there's a cause and effect, essentially, that would be very worthwhile. That if we could recognize that whatever we do has an effect, whether intended or unintended, that if we could recognize that, in particular, if we recognize that through unintentional activities, that would help us to move towards the intentional. But I think for many of us who engage in life unintentionally, we don't grasp the idea that there is an effect to our unintentional engagement with life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Excellent point. Next up is Ambika.
I just wanted to add a point to the explanation you're offering regarding aesthetics and ethics. It would be really helpful to actually see some examples in art or architecture, which gives us a sense of wholeness and beauty, and those that don't, to see the ethics of those forms which are created. And just off, I can suggest Andy Goldsworthy. You know of Andy Goldsworthy, right?
No.
His work is exquisitely beautiful, and And he does a lot of work with designing in nature. So that would certainly be enhance one's experience of oneself and the environment, and that itself becomes both ethical and aesthetic, and gives rise to a deeper awareness of our interconnectedness. So I think that that's a great question that Joe posed, and I think that examples like this would really explain it better.
Wonderful, thank you. Jing.
Yeah, I want to say what Shimmery mentioned is quite interesting because it's exactly like what we discussed in how we do things automatically, subconsciously versus consciousness. I think it's all related. I think that means when we design, we have to be more conscious. Otherwise, we do things unconscious, subconsciously, then it's not design. You create a result for sure, but it's not intentional design. I think it's very, what you mentioned, very related to, I think a lot of people, I'm listening to Sad Guru right now, and he's talking about the same thing. So I think it's all the things we learned from the Jungian also, the consciousness related to design intention. And when we don't have that consciousness, we can't really design.
Excellent point. I just want to elaborate on that. I think this is a very big issue, the kind of conscious versus unconscious or subconscious. Another way of looking at it is reactive versus proactive. Most of the time, most of the people operate in the reactive mode. And it is implicit, it is habitual. Design is all about saying, it is implementing intentionality, using all the implicit things too. So it's not like either or. It is the intentionality leading the way, and then all the implicit things and automatic things follow with it. So for example, if I'm trying to speak, there are subconscious processes which are bringing certain words up, and those are automatic, but there is an intention which is shaping it. So I think Daniel Kahneman is very good at talking about system 1 and system 2. That also goes to the heart of it. It's like design is intentional. The other part of it, which again in today's culture is not really focused on, is the role of ideal in all of this, of saying, unless you have a goal, unless you think that's where you need to go, there is no basis for intentionality. So I think that's very good. So now let me go ahead and try to answer the question about design of these meetups. Okay, at one level, so firstly, what I'm trying to do, again, I'm going to speak it out. This I've been doing for a long time. I've been doing this for 5 years in-person meetups, in New York. I would get between 60 to 80 people showing up every Saturday, spending about 5 to 7 hours talking, okay? And how, so the challenges, and firstly, what is the goal? The goal, the best way I had of formulating it was joint exploration of the world. Each of us is curious. Each of us is trying to understand the world. We know that the world is very complex and we understand only some of it. And we see that the other people are also are doing the same thing. So if we are doing this together, we can learn something from each other and progress faster. That is the basic idea. That is the basic vision. So now the question is how, that is the goal. How do you do that? How do you do that? And I came up with those 4 rules that I keep repeating in the meetups. Now they have become part of most people's culture, everybody's culture. So I don't need to keep repeating them as much. I repeat them for the sake of people who are new. But they're very simple rules. They have to be simple. So one rule is you raise your hand in order to speak. That is showing respect for other people's time so that everybody can actually speak instead of interrupting each other. The second rule is keep on topic. Most of the value is created by all the minds focusing on a delimited topic. So you have to bring everything back, keep bringing everything back to that. That's the way in which the maximum communication is achieved. So keep on topic, be brief. The idea that because there are so many people here, the only way that maximum value gets created is if many people speak. For that, each person has to speak, be brief, okay? And the last one is speak your mind. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything and do so courteously. So the speaking out is important. So everybody can speak from their heart. At the same time, courtesy of saying that, look, we disagree on many things, and that's perfectly fine, but we have respect for each other's mind, for each other's person. That's the foundation of it. So one way I did it was to have the rules. The second is that you kind of have to internalize those rules. So whenever you are interacting with anybody is interacting with anybody, those rules are reflected. And then what happens is that becomes a common knowledge that everybody is using it. So that was my kind of first, when I started the meetups, I actually came up with this very quickly, and that ended up producing very good meetups. And the kind of people, the odd thing is that not everybody likes these rules, by the way, because not everybody is trying to do joint exploration of the world. Most people are trying to do 3 other kinds of conversations, which are very different from this conversation, okay? Firstly, I'll go very, very simply, because what that happened, and that's the reason why most meetups actually don't do too well. First, what appears to be a conversation is at least 4 different kinds of things, which are very, very different from each other, okay? All of which people call conversation, and they are not able to distinguish between them. First, the most basic level is what I would call verbal grooming. Just like monkeys groom each other with hands, people groom each other with words, okay? Actually, nothing is being communicated. It's a way of maintaining social comity. But if that, to the extent to which that is the part of conversation, there isn't much going on, okay? The second one, which I particularly dislike, is people trying to establish social hierarchy. Everybody, it may be very sophisticated, okay? But everything is about people telling each other, you're lower and I'm higher. And that is what is actually going on. The third one is the most interesting one. What appears to be a conversation is simply people waiting to talk. They are not listening at all to anything that is going on. Now, the problem is, typically in any kind of a forum, all these 4 kinds of people are trying to do these 4 kinds of conversations. And my rules make it actually very difficult to do the other 3 conversations. So whereas for people who are actually trying to do a joint exploration of the world, it becomes the easiest thing in the world. So it appears to be very magical, but it's very frustrating to the people who are trying to do the other things. So it is a self-selective process. It's a simple design which makes it very hard for people who don't want to do this, and very easy for people who want to do this. So that's my short answer, Shane Marie. I don't know whether that answers your question. Go ahead.
So, I mean, obviously you're extremely bright, and you're extremely kind and patient with those of us that are learning. Obviously, in most instances, you have an understanding deeper than we do. So how do you navigate that? Because I imagine that obviously there's compassion in you and a willingness to teach and explore. How do you satisfy your own desire to also be at the next level where you have minds greater than yours? So is that, do you have to have two different circles where you're one willing to teach and deal with people like us who know less, and then you choose a different circle where you're learning? So how does that work?
Excellent question. My solution to that is firstly to be in New York, where you get many people from all kinds of backgrounds all the time and in massive quantities. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is that, so for example, when I would do in-person meetup, let's say 50 people showed up. Okay, of those 50 people, firstly, they were all coming to discuss the topic that I was interested in. I would do meetups only on things I wanted to study. Okay, not anything that I knew. I'd never do meetups on things I know. I'd always like to do meetups on things I'm learning. Okay, so that's one part. The second part is that whenever I do these meetups, out of these 50 people, there would be 5 people who have been studying what I'm trying to study for 20 years. Okay, and I would learn a lot from them. There'd be about good like 40 people who don't know much, but are really interested in knowing. And I have to explain what it is. I'm not very good at speaking. So just the effort of trying to put my thoughts into words and making it accessible to other people, you learn a lot. Preparing for it, you learn a lot. And there will be 5 people who come because they hate what I'm saying. So I would have to deal with all kinds of fundamental objections to that. And I find that in that cauldron, you learn a lot. And in New York, just like here, people come from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of knowledge, and all kinds of attitudes, not attitudes, all kinds of perspectives. So it's not necessarily that somebody has to know more than you in order to teach you something. Somebody might ask a question that you have never thought of. So I find that just having good, thoughtful people seriously interested in learning, it's really accelerated my learning. That's why I do so many meetups, because I find it actually energizing. And I find that I'm learning much, much faster than I could possibly do. Jing.
Yeah, I have to say it's quite funny. You mentioned the social grooming. That's exactly how I feel with my college classmates WeChat group. Like all they talk about, like, whose birthday? That's happy birthday. Who got this award? Happy award. Like, there's no real conversation. And I found most of the place, you don't really have a lot of conversation, especially deeper level. That's why I keep coming back to here. This is the only meetup group I was like, keep coming back because the structure you have. And I also want to mention about the thing you mentioned, the ideal. I thought it's so critical for design and everything in life, because I think, even I'm not religious, but I think the best thing about religion, because it creates its ideal God. Like the God is ideal, so you want to be perfect yourself like him. And even art, I just realized I read too much novel when I was younger. So I have this idealistic way of seeing the world, which is a big gap between the real and ideal. You have to match up. It's maybe a bad thing, but it could be a good thing. I think the thing I realized, when people become too realistic when they're young, they have little space to grow. That's why when you're young, people all read novels because they're all made up. Like Gone with the Wind, I know the story of the writer, just opposite from the novel. So the guy who's like charismatic and all this and very loyal in the book, he's not loyal at all. So, they put all the best character in one person in the novel, and when you're young, you believe that's true. But when you get older, you realize it's not. But you still have this ideal you want to pursue. I think that's the beauty of in every aspect of life, the ideal, the power of ideal in design, and every aspect of life. I think so. I really like the thing you mentioned.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jing. Shane Marie, to give you another example, I'm doing this series on Gospel of John, Bible. Okay, now I am not religious. Okay, and I have no base in Christianity at all. I did not grow up here. I don't know anything. Okay. And I'm learning so much because everybody there is more familiar with it than I am. At the same time, because I'm not familiar, I'm able to see some deep patterns. So for example, the Gospel of John starts with, in the beginning was the Word. That's the truth. Then Word became flesh. That is actually design. That's bringing truth into real world. And what does that design do? It transforms the world. It is a catalyst. Everything that you make, every good design, it's catalyst for changing the world. It transforms humanity. And what's the end product of it is the Holy Spirit, which is the yearning of people towards truth. So there is that loop, starting from truth, going into flesh, which is Jesus, of a person who is 100% God, 100% man, interacting as a man with humanity, producing profound effects that produces, even after he's gone, produces the impetus to yearn for the truth and to pursue God in the process. Now that is a very deep theme, which is exact. This is true, real, true, design, real, and ideal. Yearning for the ideal. So that it's, but seeing those patterns, right? Now I'm seeing this pattern in something so different than design, but it is the same point and it is very profound. So that's what you get, by doing things. And that's thanks to all these folks who actually know so much, who are able to communicate to me. I'm able to read a little bit, but then people speak. So that's the upside. Go ahead, Shane Marie.
I was just going to ask, because I wasn't brought up in religion either, and there are ways that I interpret the Christian tradition that really opens itself up to me, which is not traditional rendering. And how do you stay open to, like, the Christianity suggests a living message, and so how do you stay open to the message, the living message of anything that keeps feeding and giving? Like, how do you make sure that you don't know too much? Not that I worry about that for myself, but just that, how do you stay, I don't even know what it is, innocent enough, open enough, I don't know, that you can receive the breadth of the message there? Because it seems like so many times that messages become dead and people espouse them, but there's no living to the message. So just how do you find your way to make sure that whatever message stays alive to you, or that if there is a message, that you're open to it, so it lives and breathes and continues and through you and changes and transforms, but also maintains what it is? I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm making sense there.
I mean, what I would say is that I don't know that I have a good answer, because I do not know the Bible at all. I mean, I have very, very, little grasp of it, but I'm approaching it like I approach everything else. Like I'm approaching the design way, like I'm approaching Tao Te Ching, like I'm approaching, Louis Sullivan. Ultimately, it is between you and God, or it is between you and reality. You are trying to understand reality. All of these things, all of this work that other people have done is speaking something about it. And you have to actually understand it, put it together. So one idea is the idea from the How to Read a Book, which is syntopical, which is you're trying to see patterns across different things. You're not saying, what is this book saying? That's not the question. The question is, what is there? Who am I? What is the world? What should I do? That's the level at which you're taking. And then you are actually creating a conversation between all these books. All the people who are discussing it are contributing to the conversation. So that's what Mortimer Adler calls the great conversation of all the thinkers across all the fields. It's the scientists and the religious people and the novelist and the historians and the psychologist and the economist, all talking to one another. And you're trying to piece together that in conversation with actual living people like this. And that is the thing that makes it living, because you are trying to be honest. Anytime you get locked into any kind of ideas and regard the ideas as being primary, I think you've already lost, because it's the reality which counts, the nature that counts. It's the truth of your own being that counts. So keep coming back to it. And the simplest way is to look at multiple things and listen very closely to multiple living people. So that's go ahead.
Can I ask you quickly, because I understand the notion of being locked in an idea. How do you find yourself in a sea of ideas then? So like there's one sense of being lost in like committing to an idea, right? And then like you can be lost in like not having any conviction. So I'm confused about where that balance is.
Sure. The best formulation of that I've seen is by Sapolsky. He says strong beliefs weakly held. Okay. So that means you have to have very clear idea of what you think. And you have to hold them very, it has to be very strong beliefs, but they have to be weakly held in the sense that you are open to feedback against that. And if there is feedback, you're willing to change that. So I like that, because you do need strong beliefs, because that is what you need in order to move forward in a direction. You're saying, this is what I need to do. But you're doing that with open eyes and taking feedback. Wonderful. Anybody else has any comments? All right. I don't know whether you see, this is just so, these conversations are so good. Let me ask people. Now, I don't think these Thursday meetups are necessary. Okay. So maybe next Thursday we will not do it, but you can tell me whether this is something that you would like to continue doing, or you would rather put it in Monday. I'm not going to decide this based on a vote, because I have to decide this based on the entire design of the entire program for 52 Living Ideas, because I have to keep introducing new ideas. And I'm kind of trying to get an ideas up to a level where everything is kind of set up properly. And then I kind of focus on it, put it in smaller amount of time, so I can add something, a new track. So just privately, you can tell me, you can send me a message whether whether you would like to continue this or not. My inclination is to just put it into Monday, so we can concentrate everything and try to get more done on Monday itself, and then use Thursdays for something new. So that's the plan. All right, folks. So thank you very much. A pleasure. And Robert, thank you very much for your ideas about approaching the book. I think, see, there are many books I have which are like that, which I have read more than like 40 times. So Robert, I have to tell you, if you could unmute yourself, I just want to tell you something. The book that I read like that was Kindergarten Chats by Louis Sullivan. And I liked it so much that I bought like 32 copies of it and gave them to everybody whom I thought was worthwhile. Okay. And I found something really remarkable. Like 1/3 of the people said, thank you so much. This completely changed my life. And about 1/3 of the people said, that's interesting. But 1/3 of the people told me, why did you give me this? What is he saying? What is this? This makes no sense. Okay. So what I did is that I went and rewrote the whole book. I edited the whole book. I tried to, because he's very metaphoric, and I put it on my blogs. It took me a year to do that. But, and I keep telling people that if you think this is good, stop reading it, go read the original. But it is, you have to work at it to make a book yours. And it is those cards and those notes that make it. So thank you very much, Robert. Appreciate that.
I'd like to add one thing.
Please.
I said that, you know, the book began in the 70s. So those ideas in that book didn't happen just by sitting down and writing out a novel or a narrative. There was a lot of thought and argument and discussion and just general self-examination by Harold and Eric as designers that produced that book. So don't feel bad if you don't get it at first reading or the first time through.
Yes, and you've been reading it since 70s, right? These ideas?
Absolutely. You know, they come, well, not just me, Harold too.
Yes.
There's things in the book he probably would admit he shouldn't have written that way or would like to change. And this is the second edition, so.
Yes.
Learn by doing.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Robert. And thank you very much, everybody. See you folks soon. Bye.